My wife's best friend convinced her I was cheating after she gave birth, and when my wife died in a crash fueled by lies, that same friend tried to take the microphone at her funeral. I was washing bottles at midnight when my wife's best friend called to ask if I knew where Maya was. The baby monitor glowed on the counter like a lighthouse for one ship, our son snoring in tiny puffs that sounded like a clock. I said, "She's in the bedroom, I think," and Jessa said, "No, she's with me," and laughed the way people laugh when they want you to ask why. I didn't. I'd learned not to feed Jessa's pauses. The truth is I was already walking on eggshells by then. Maya had given birth 6 weeks early after a brutal labor that ended in a suction cup and a field of nurses moving like a dance they didn't want us to notice. The first night home she cried because she couldn't find the right burp cloth, and I cried because I couldn't fix anything anymore with a trip to Target and a joke. The pediatrician said the word colic like a weather forecast, and the OB said baby blues in a voice that made it sound like a cloudy afternoon. I said postpartum depression and the room went quiet except for the baby, who didn't know we were supposed to whisper around big words. Jessa installed herself like a subscription. She brought soup and then opinions. She came over at 10 p.m. and then 7 a.m. and then noon, a rotating satellite that blocked whatever warmth Maya and I were trying to catch. She reminded Maya to hydrate and then reminded her to watch him. Him meant me. She told Maya men wander after babies like children lose interest in toys, and that if I went to the store too often it meant I was meeting someone in the parking lot. She said this with her hands, too, a little flutter that cast spells. I wanted to like Jessa. Before the baby, I did. She was the one who carried Maya's train at our wedding and slipped me gum before the photos. She cried when we said our vows. She's funny, or can be, the kind of person who makes waiters feel part of the joke instead of the butt of it. But after Ari was born she turned mean like milk left out. She took Maya into the bedroom and shut the door for girls' time, and when they came out Maya's eyes were red and I was the reason. I tried to fight smart. A therapist on Tuesdays with a couch that swallowed me whole, a couples counselor on Thursdays who said we were each speaking our own language of love and fear and missing every translation. I washed bottles and folded tiny pajamas until my fingers developed an opinion. I learned the route of our neighborhood in laps you could do with a stroller and a prayer. I took night shift whenever I could, humming tuneless songs because lullabies felt like lies when your heart had teeth. At 3 months Ari started smiling, real ones that looked like he was remembering a joke from another life, and I thought, we can make it to the other side. Then Maya started checking my phone. "Who's Casey?" she asked, reading text messages over my shoulder while I reheated coffee. "My boss," I said. "Short for Cassandra." "You didn't tell me her name was Cassandra," she said, like names were ownership deeds. "I didn't tell you her middle name either," I said, and immediately knew that was the wrong joke for the room. Jessa was the one who taught Maya to set a passcode on our thermostat. You control your environment, not him, and to turn off read receipts. He doesn't get to know what you've seen, and to open a private email because women need privacy to be whole. Privacy we could have survived. Paranoia ate whatever was left. The first time Maya threw something at me, it was a wooden spoon. It hit the cabinet and splintered like cheap fireworks. Ari was asleep. We both froze and looked at his door like we just said a slur in church. She put her hand over her mouth and whispered, "I'm so sorry," and then she cried into my chest until my t-shirt stuck to my skin, and I told her it was okay because in that moment I wanted it to be. 2 weeks later, Jessa found a lipstick stain on a coffee mug in my car cup holder and texted Maya a photo like a paparazzo catching a scandal. The lipstick was Maya's. She'd used my car the day before. It didn't matter. Jessa sent screenshots with captions like "I know what I know." Maya showed me the photos and said, "Explain this," and I said, "It's your lipstick," and she said, "That's exactly what you'd say." Jessa looked at me like she was already drafting a speech for court. I begged Maya to see a psychiatrist. "It's not a moral failing," I said. "It's chemicals and deprivation and the fact that Ari thinks night is day." She said she wouldn't be drugged, a word Jessa had planted like a burr, and then Jessa sent her a link to an article about SSRIs making you numb to your intuition. Every time I made an appointment, Jessa drove her to the park instead and took photos of Maya in the golden hour, a woman holding a baby in a dress that looked like forgiveness. She posted them with captions about divine motherhood, and the comments said, "Radiant, Goddess, Queen." The night I told Maya I was moving to the guest room for a while, she looked at me like I had admitted to a crime and then announced my sentence. "You're leaving," she said. "You're really leaving." I tried to explain separation as a bridge, not a cliff. I said the therapist's words, space, safety, reset, and she heard only reset, as in reboot the marriage without the man. She took Ari and walked into the bathroom and locked the door, and I sat on the floor outside listening to the fan and the shallow breaths of two people I would have dismantled a building for. I called Jessa because I didn't trust myself to say the right thing anymore. "Can you come over?" I asked. "She's in the bathroom with Ari and I don't want to scare her," Jessa said. "Why are you even there?" Like I was the intruder and not the father who paid the gas bill, and hung up on me. In the morning Maya said she was taking Ari to her mother's for a few days. I packed the diaper bag and put gas in her car and wrote down pediatric dosing instructions for Tylenol because the pediatrician had taught me a trick for fevers and I wanted to be useful. "Text me when you get there," I said. "I love you," I said, because love is a rope you throw even when the other person can't catch. She looked at me like I had offered her a coupon. She didn't go to her mother's. I know because her mother called me to ask if we were coming Sunday and if I could bring the good mustard. I called Maya and it went straight to voicemail. I tracked our shared phone plan and watched the little dot that meant my family drift around town like a moth hitting glass. Jessa posted a photo from a cafe with a caption about new chapters. Maya was in the corner, half cropped out, Ari's hat pulled low. I should have called the police right then. I didn't because my brain was still playing by marriage rules, not emergency ones. I called Maya's father and asked if he'd heard from her. I called Jessa and got a dial tone and a sudden, white-hot conviction that if I had Jessa in front of me I would say things I wouldn't be able to unsay. At 5 p.m., Maya texted, "You win." I stared at the phrase until the letters turned into shapes and then back again. I called and she picked up and I heard road noise that sounded like a storm. "Pull over," I said. "Please pull over," she said, "I'm so tired," and Jessa's voice in the background said, "He's manipulating you," and the call ended like a door slamming in a movie. A state trooper knocked on my door at 2:14 a.m. He had the same delicate face as the therapist, as our pediatrician, as anyone who has been trained to deliver bad things softly. Maya had hit a guardrail on the southbound overpass. The baby was with a neighbor by miracle and car seat engineering. The trooper said words like instantaneous and not in pain, words you say for the living because the dead don't need vocabulary anymore. My knees didn't give out. That's what people always say happens in stories. Mine held because there was a baby in the back room who was going to wake up hungry and I had to have legs to get to him. Grief is a dumb animal. It doesn't care about context. It doesn't separate anger and sorrow, it eats them at the same table. I fed the baby and texted Maya's mother and took a shower because my body was making decisions without me and I thought hot water could trick it into thinking I was safe. In the mirror I looked like a man who had stayed up too late and not like a widower, which is a word that sounds like antique furniture and not the shape a person becomes when lightning hits their life. At 8, Jessa called. "I'm with Maya's mom," she said, voice steady, almost relieved. "We're planning. Her church can hold 500. I'll handle the eulogy." I said, "No." She didn't hear me, or she chose not to. "I have drafts," she said, about how she was more than the labels people tried to put on her, about how she was light, about how she knew when a room needed softness. I can speak to her truth. "You can't speak at all," I said, because anger had gotten out of bed. "You don't get to make her a brand." Silence, not the kind that means someone is hurt but the kind that means a fuse has melted. "You're not in charge of this," she said. "You weren't there for her." "I was there every night," I said. "I have the receipts." "Literally. Walgreens knows." "You're cruel," she said, and for the first time since I met her I heard something under the steel, something like exhaustion. "You always were." The funeral was a blur of white flowers and faces I didn't recognize and a pastor who had never met Maya telling us what she loved. I wrote the eulogy at our kitchen table at 3 a.m. with Ari's socks in the dryer and the baby monitor blinking like a tired star. I kept crossing out sentences that made her into a neat lesson. Maya wasn't tidy. She was generous and petty and kind and terrifying and hilarious and tired and trying. She was a person, not an argument. At the church doors Jessa stood with a clipboard like an event planner. She wore black that looked expensive and grief that looked practiced. She told the usher she'd be taking the second slot at the podium. I told the usher she wouldn't. The usher looked at the pastor, who looked at me, and I said, "No," in the tone you learn from doctors when they're not asking your opinion. During the service, Jessa tried to stand. The pastor put a hand on her arm and gently shook his head. She sat. The pew creaked like a small animal. I spoke about the first time Maya fell asleep with her head in my lap on a bus because she trusted me not to miss our stop. I spoke about how she loved the sound of snow in the early morning before tires ruin it, and how she could make our dead plants live just by moving them near a different window, and how she once returned a wallet with cash still in it and then worried all day that the person would think she'd taken a bill. I spoke about how she wanted a dog and we got one, and how she named him Murphy because it sounded like a friend, and how Murphy still sleeps by the front door like he's waiting for a footstep he knows he'll hear again in a different life. I did not speak about Jessa. I did not speak about the night or the guardrail or the text. I did not make Maya a cautionary tale. I made her a person. After, in the reception hall, Jessa cornered me by the cookies. "You erased me," she said. "I was the only one who showed up." "Showing up is not the same as helping," I said. "You handed her fear and called it intuition." Her chin lifted. "She needed someone to tell her the truth," she said. "You were lying." "I was sleeping on a floor beside a bassinet," I said. "You were filming Golden Hour." She took a breath that failed. "I loved her," she said finally, "and I believe she believes that." Maybe she did, in the way some people love a mirror. "Then love her now," I said. "Leave us alone. We live small now. Me and Ari and Murphy and the ghost of the life that could have been." I moved the bed to the other wall because grief made grooves in the old place that my feet kept falling into. I keep a calendar of normal things because normal is medicine: garbage day, library story time, the week the pediatrician said we could start strawberries, the Tuesday my neighbor brings her teenage daughter to babysit and I go sit in a coffee shop and stare at people reading as if I've found a zoo for calm. I text Maya's mother photos and she sends back voice notes in which she says Ari's name like a blessing and sometimes she cries and sometimes she doesn't and neither version is wrong. I went back to therapy and said the sentence I'd been avoiding: "I am angry she left me with a fire." The therapist nodded and said, "Both can be true," the most boring, saving phrase in the English language. I say it to myself when Ari cries for no reason my adult brain can decode. Both can be true. He's fed and dry and safe, and he is devastated because life is large when you are small. Jessa moved to another state. I know because someone sent me a link to a video where she looked straight at the camera and said a man had silenced her at a funeral and that grief needed a voice. The comments were full of women who had been silenced by men. I closed the tab and went back to cutting strawberries into ridiculous fractions because the pediatrician said start small, and Ari was laughing at the dog, and the son made a square on the kitchen floor big enough for both of them to sit in. Sometimes, at night, I hear a car on the overpass and my body goes cold like a room with a window open. I go check the locks, not because of danger but because the ritual makes my hands feel useful. I stand in the doorway and watch my son breathe, two small shoulders rising and falling like an argument settling. I put my palm on his back and feel the stubborn fact of his living. I whisper, "We're here," which is not poetry but is, I think, the only promise I can honestly keep. A week ago he said mama at the grocery store and I had to sit down on the edge of the freezer case like a man feigning in a bad play. He was looking at a strawberry, so maybe it wasn't about anything except sound. I told him mama loved strawberries, which is true, and that we would always buy them when they were good, which is also true, and then I picked him up and he put his hand on my ear the way babies do when they decide you are furniture, and we went home. I don't have a grand moral. I have this: be wary of anyone who stands between you and the person you love with a handful of matches and calls herself a friend. Get sleep if you can. Eat something with protein. Take photos but also put the phone down. If you're the one left holding a baby and an echo, let the echo be loud for a while and then let it be a hum. Call the doctor. Take the meds. Speak at the funeral even if your voice shakes. Tell the truth in present tense. We were. She is. He is. We are.